It's on, was it? Oh, well, yeah, give it a while. Yeah. It's all right, just oops. You're right. You can be live. I don't want to be live. Is that going? Yeah. Oh, I'm going. I'm going to start, even though there's a bit of a cleaning up thing going on. I'm in impromptu MCing tonight, so I'm going to start with some MC things. There's a couple of things. Firstly, we got this little note from the CWEA, which basically says, please put stuff back where it came from. So what we need to do when we set things up is be kind of aware where they were. In particular, out the back room there that's being used at the moment, they sometimes set the tables up for something that happens on Thursday morning, and we didn't know that. And we have tried to put them back where we thought they went because we didn't know where they were to start off with. So if you arrive here early and you're going to shift stuff, take a picture of it and put it back where it was. The other thing we're going to do is the chairs at the back at the moment, the lower ones, which are vastly more comfortable, and people have been getting out and sitting on them because they're vastly more comfortable, are also a pain in the butt putting back in the right place. So what we're going to do from now on in is leave those there and cross our fingers and toes that the fancy new chairs will be here sooner rather than later. And then so it becomes simple. So from here we go, we just have to put these chairs back where they were. And if we've used anything in any of the other rooms, put them back where they were as well. So, and hopefully we won't get notes like this and they might try sending us emails or ringing us up or whatever. It's not us as well, but it's not just us, because you'll notice there's a thing on the door there with another set of instructions. So there are other organisations who leave things in a bit of a shambles as well. So I suspect that's where that all came from. There's a couple of things here that people can help themselves to. Dennis was in at Photo and Video the other day and he asked for a couple of film canisters and they gave him 1 million film canisters. So if anybody wants 500,000 even film canisters, come and take them. Help yourself. Dennis has a use for some, but not 1 million. So feel free to do that. Now, they might be useful for some of Jane's goodies out the back there. And in the kitchen, there are these grapes that John Hawkins has bought, and they're nice. And he said, take some with you. So quicken the hungry, get the grapes afterwards. Thank you, John. That's cool. They're pesticide free, aren't they? A couple of reminders. The NPC finished last night, not tonight. So today's the first day of the new one. And I can't remember what it's called because it's Fleeting. Yeah, that's right. So ready to go with Fleeting. Next week, there's nothing about hand-ins here. So that's what is due on the hand-ins. But I wanted to talk about John Suckling's walkabout, which he sent you an email for, which is on Sunday morning. Now, John specifically sort of thought about it and said, yes, we'll do it at Easter anyway. So we've got this consistency of the first weekend going. So if people are away or not here, so be it. But yeah, it'll be there, 9:30, the corner of Tuam and Madras Street. And he sent out a whole bunch of things on shapes and lines and all that sort of stuff. So next step with John is on Sunday, so remember that. Something we're going to start talking about regularly, because people need to listen to it regularly and start thinking about it, is the upcoming exhibition. Penny.
Hello, is that working? Yes.
Yep.
Hopefully you all received an email from me outlining sort of the beginning of the planning for the exhibition. If you happened to have an opportunity to go and look at the gallery, please do. It's a beautiful space. What we encourage people to do at the moment is think about what you might like to print, even if it's one of your digital entries, but you've never seen it in print. Think about what you would like to print. What's one of your really great images that you're proud of, that you'd like to see on paper, basically. We will have some planned help evenings or information about getting images ready for print, so that'll be coming up. But I'd really like to encourage people who haven't printed particularly to have a go at this, because once you see your work printed, it kind of does something. It really does make you feel it by looking at it. in a hard copy. So yeah, please think about what you like to print, and come and talk to any of the experienced members or people that regularly print their work, and we can help you along with trying to decide what kind of image and preparing it for printing.
Cool, thank you. Yeah, no, that's good. Remembering, of course, that we are also probably going to have a display of digital work as well. So some images could go in there. There's some themed categories that Penny talked about, because the exhibition's for such a kind of a long time. We can have patches of bits and pieces. So go and have a look through that, and then think about, just your favourite work that would be on the wall. And if the only thing that happens out of this is you come home with a piece of artwork ready to stick on your wall, and you take it and put it on your wall, then that's a step in the right place. So we'll be talking about how Penny gets hers made, where she sends it to Auckland and it comes back ready to go, printed and matted and ready to hang on the wall. We'll be talking about some other options of printing using members who've got printers, and/or we can use photosynthesis facilities. They've now got stuff that we can use there, and you can print your own. Bunch of options. At the moment, we want you definitely thinking about, is it this one or that one or these 5 or whatever. So get yourself a bit of a folder together about exhibition things. They don't have to be, but they're available. Yeah, that's the idea. Yeah, it's the same deal as if anybody went to the photosynthesis exhibition, they had some works that up there that just said NFS on them. So that's all. We'll be coordinating and thinking about a reasonable price to make sense for the whole lot. So we're consistent. Somebody's not trying to undercut. There's no undercutting the market going on at CPS. So, but we'll think about what a reasonable number is, and there'll be some options about that sort of thing. Any other questions while we started talking about it? Okay. That's the MC things I could think about. Can we crank up the machine, please? I'll introduce myself if you like. And I'm going to talk tonight about intentional camera movement. Got some words written on here, so I'm going to end up being half glasses on, half glasses off. Okay, so the crux of this is that I'm going to be talking about some of the basic principles behind ICM, why I like ICM, why I do ICM, and I'm going to show you some things that are part of my process, and we'll go from there. So, first of all, why? What's the point? Why not make a decent, sharp image and be done it? This bloody camera cost me thousands of dollars, and I wave it around all over the place. Isn't that stupid? Got expensive lenses that I'm making blurry pictures with. There's a degree of insanity in there. Why don't I make proper ones? And I'm going to show you, hopefully, I do make proper images, but why I like making blurry ones. So, for a start, ICM images tend to simplify and abstract things. So details disappear that's the whole point, is to get the details to disappear, and the image becomes about shape and form, and the shape and form comes to the fore. Depending on how much you can do it or how you do it, that can change things, but that sort of simplification is what creates abstraction. Here's an example of an image which is greatly simplified, and the reality is, what is this picture of? Doesn't matter. I doubt that you could work it out, but it's clearly about something. It's about light and colour, really. It's about the colours of nature. That's a bit of a hint about what it is. It's in a natural kind of environment, but there's movement and something organic going on there that's kind of unidentifiable and abstract. So that's why that one is about. Another term that people use quite a lot when they talk about ICM images is impressionism and painterliness. Is there any such word as painterliness? I'm not sure, but anyway, those are the two terms that people talk about being painterly and impressionist. What does that mean? It's easy enough to say I'm going to make these images in an impressionist style. What does that actually mean? Let's look at a couple of definitions before we go further. This isn't the whole definition. Well, this is pulled out of a Wikipedia definition. The point being, impressionism, accurate depiction of light and its changing qualities. So when you go and do a walkabout with John and he's talking about what light does, this is a form of photography that actually concentrates on that light. We're really keen to know about the accurate depiction of light and the qualities. Painterliness, textured movement, and emotional impact. So emotional impact rather than a detailed, realistic representation. That's what we're looking for, and those two sort of definitions combined together are, for me, what ICM is all about. Here's a painterly and impressionistic image. What's it got? What's it about? It's about sparkles, a bit of light. There are mountain forms in the background, but they're abstracted, and so you can't, it's not about a specific place. I could tell you where it is, but it wouldn't make any difference. It's about a place and form. It's about the relationship between mountains and water and sky and light. And the third thing is celebrate serendipity. Basically, what I'm talking about here is where something different, unique happens, and then you run with it. This is where the have fun part of the whole story is. Just, wow, gee, is a cool place to start. Accidental discoveries happen all the time when you do kind of weird things. So be open to something accidentally happening and then something magical happening from the accidentalness. Here's an example of an accidentally happening. I was photographing something with a slow shutter speed. It was down by the water, and then I was wandering along in the sort of underneath the pine forest, and I took a photograph down of the cone, the light shining on the cone, but I still had 2-second shutter exposure. Oh, bloody hell. And then, oh, that's quite good. Now I've changed my camera and I did it intentionally. So that's the key. Start with something that's, well, that's interesting. How did that happen? Celebrate the serendipity of what's happened and then keep going with it. And that's what I did in this case. It became a purposeful representation of the accident, really. So let's go back to those three things. Here are the three reasons that I collectively use for justifying, well, for going down this direction of using ICM. And they're collectively called creative photography. You'll see we're doing a competition this year, creative photography. There are creative sections in all sorts of salons. There are creative categories and entirely creative sort of things. Personally, I find it a somewhat arrogant assumption that normal photography is somehow not creative. And I don't think that's the implication, but it almost kind of feels like it. So I don't really like the fact that we're calling it creative, because lots of things can be creative. Perhaps I think instead of creative it's a different, a better way to do this, a better term, but it's only a start. So where we go with it and what we do with it is important. Consider this quote. Edgar Degas said that art is not what you see, but what you make others see. Now, I only kind of partly agree with Mr. Degas, because I believe that we have absolutely no control over how somebody is going to view our artwork, and we have no right to even expect some sort of control. And in an extreme situation, you could have taken a joyful photograph of a little 4-year-old boy jumping around, and one of the viewers, that might represent somebody that was in their family that they haven't seen for ages, and they may become sad by your joyful picture. So you have no control over that. But you do have control over trying to make something purposeful, trying to make a message, trying to ascertain what it is that others see. So that's the point. You need to have an intent or a purpose behind your ICM pictures. It's not just different for the sake of different. It's not streaky for the sake of streaky. It's not impressionist for the sake of impressionist. It's all those things to try and say something. Make your creative photography purposeful. And as I just said, I think, wow, that's cool is a good starting point, but you need to go further from this to make it cool for a reason. I'm going to take a step back and sidetrack here slightly from my experience with the honours board a couple of weeks ago. This doesn't apply just to ICM imagery, but the vast majority of the people that missed out, predominantly at the associate level, it would be fair to say, was because the imagery didn't feel purposeful. It didn't feel like there was a reason behind it. And in particular, the ICM components that were in. Hello? Oh, there we go. We working again? Yep. Cool, isn't that magical? What was I talking about? I was talking about the honours board and people not making purposeful photography, and that shows. So I'm not going to go on too long about that, but that is the key. Be purposeful in whatever your imagery is. Okay, a little bit about how. So how do we make some successful IC images? We've got a few practicalities I'm going to kind of talk about here. So firstly, I'm going to go through some tips and hints and basic structure that you can think about and apply to you. Change completely if you do it differently. I honestly don't care. This is just the way that I do it and things that work for me. And then I'm going to step through a few pictures. No, actually quite a lot of pictures. And I'm going to show you how I do them. So just demonstrate the waving of the camera is the crux of it. And we'll just go from there as we step our way through. Okay, tips and hints. As I said, I've got 5 tips and hints. The first one, camera setup. Pretty much all modern cameras today have some sort of ability to put in presets. It could be the little dial on the top that has U123 on a Nikon. I think it's just got 123 on a Canon, on a Sony. I don't know what it's got on other cameras. You can preload a setting and you can have number 2 as my ICM setting. Or lots of cameras also have the ability to push a button and you can go instantly from whatever you're doing to this predetermined setting. So what I set up when it comes to the predetermined setting is I put the camera in aperture priority, I put the ISO on the lowest setting, and that includes expanded lows for those cameras that have got expanded lows. So if your minimum ISO is 64, but you've got a couple of expanded -1 and expanded -2s, then go the whole hog. You'll probably find some camera write-up somewhere saying, oh, don't ever use the expanded -2 because of some horrendous thing that it does to the picture quality. Doesn't make any difference in an ICM image. So I want the longest exposure with that. So use that expanded ISO setting and put your camera on f22 or f45, it'll go that far. So just means when you push the button, no matter what the lens it is, you're going to get the slowest shutter imaginable without doing anything else. And then you can just, with a one push of the button or a turn of the knob, have a look at your camera and see what shutter speed your aperture priority is giving you. We'll talk about that in a second. So that's what I do. I have a single button that takes me to ICM mode, and I can go from walking along shooting birds to ICM with a push of the button. Let's talk about the variables then. So effectively, it's a combination, but all those things that I just talked about are creating a combination of a shutter speed, and then you're going to match your movement for the shutter speed that you achieve. So I find for me, a shutter speed, the sweet spot is somewhere between 1 and 2 seconds. So a second and a half is enough to slowly but precisely move the camera where I want it to go. But on a bright sunny day, if I haven't got anything set up, I don't have an ND filter with me or anything like that, I can push that button, and if I can get the shutter speed down to a 30th of a second, I can create the same effect with my 1 second and a 30th of a second. I just have to go like that. So it's a combination of moving faster if you have a shorter shutter speed and moving slower, and some other options with the other. ND filters. Yes, I've got ND filters. I love the case clip-on one, so I've got a couple of those that will sit in my pocket usually when I do that, and just clapped it on. I usually use the 3-stop. If it's super duper bright, I'll go the 6, but so a 3-stop ND filter is probably all you need for this sort of thing. Your 10-stop that is trying to get silky smooth water is not what you're looking for here. So get yourself an intermediate sized ND filter. And as I said, for me, the sweet spot's between 1 and 2 seconds. Let your failures lead the process. Talked about this already a little bit about serendipity, but you will find as you try to get things to happen, they won't. Something else will happen, and sometimes that'll send you down another path, and just be open and free to that. The key, though, is you've got to become the chimping champion. So make sure you chimp. Just set your camera up in a good way to be able to look and see what you've done. I will quite often, if I've got a particular move I want, I might do 5 or 6 of them, and then I'll chimp. And then quickly scroll back. Yeah, that worked. I'm trying to do 5 or 6 of exactly the same move. It's pretty hard to achieve, actually. You'll get some that are better than others. But make sure you're constantly chimping to inform what you're going to do going forward. And so normally, in a normal kind of world where you're photographing one thing that you've set it up and thought about and put on a tripod, and then you make one frame and you're happy with it, here you're going to take 20 frames to get yourself in the flow. So do not be afraid of taking too many pictures. And when you get back in the computer later on, do not be afraid of throwing them away. So let's failures lead the process. Post-processing freedom. Because you're abstracting things, because the images are unsharp and the file and things are kind of all over the place, exposures can be a little bit unusual as well, your files are super flexible. You can do all sorts of things with them. So bear that in mind when you're making photographs. If you get a bright spot that you don't like, don't worry about it. You can get rid of it easy later. So look past some of those kind of things. I'll talk about that a little bit more later on and show you some examples of it. The other key that I've used quite a lot, in a certain lighting circumstance with a particular subject, I'll often make 2 or 3 frames with slightly different compositions, or that match in with my blurry ones, of a sharp image. It's useful to take a sharp thing home, shot in the same light, shot at the same time, that you might say, if you've got a tree that you're doing something, if you take a picture of that tree sharp, one, it'll remind you what it looked like, because it won't look like that in any of your other pictures, but you might want to bring some sharp in it later. So that sits in the post-processing freedom thing. And the other thing is that you can shoot anywhere. You don't have to go anywhere to special. What you're photographing could just be a shadow or a patch of light that's on the lounge wall on a nice sunny afternoon, and you're sitting at the table with your camera, and get it out and you can make a whole bunch of pictures over nothing but light. Remember, we're talking about Impressionism, which is all about light. Every lounge in the country has a splash of light on the wall sometimes that could be a subject of your photograph. A little blast of colour, somebody drops some paint on the pavement somewhere. You can do all sorts of cool things with a blob of colour that's on the pavement. So you can shoot anywhere. You don't need to go on fancy trips to Timbuktu. You don't need to go anywhere, and you can do anything. So that's an advantage of this type of photography. So there's my 5 tips and hints. Right, techniques. Now, I'm going to go through some of these techniques, and I'm going to show you what I did with the camera, well, I think I did with the camera, because you don't, there's not stored in the metadata, unfortunately, but it's useful to work it out, and we'll go from there. So I'm going to look at simple movements. So essentially one axis. I'm going to look at combined movements in multiple planes. I'm going to talk about holding the camera still and then moving it. I'm going to talk about shooting while you're actually moving, because that's another cool thing that does all sorts of stuff. I'm going to talk about multi-exposures and how you can do interesting things by using the multi-exposure functions on your camera. I'm going to demonstrate the flexibility that post-processing has, and then we're going to talk about the full multi-style of ICM towards the end. So, simple movement. As I said, single axis, horizontal, vertical, or whatever. Let's start with vertical movement. And this is the classic. You've all seen pictures of trees, and I'm pretty sure most of you have had a crack at this at some stage. It's a go-to anytime you're standing in a forest. It simplifies things. It creates that abstract form that is clearly still a tree, and it's fun. And I've got bajillions of these sort of photographs. Some of them are a bit ordinary, but it's a starting point that I kind of always do when I stand around some trees. Some aspects that are worth thinking about in there. So again, I've got my camera, I'm holding it out here, and I'm just doing that. And I tend to move my arms up and down like that, as opposed to wrists. So it's just an arm sweep like that. The issue in the trees, and this is it's most apparent in trees, but it applies everywhere. If you've got it right up high and you're shooting up into a forest, you're going to have elements of the sky imminent. And so you're going to get a big exposure difference from the sky to down the bottom of the dark forest and things. So things are going to change over that exposure period. So it will make a difference if you focus and set your camera up down here and you zoom up, or whatever you call that, pan up, then you're going to have the exposure set up for the dark, and you're going to blow the highlights out completely. Or if you start up and you go down, you're going to have highlights looking fine and everything else dark and gloomy. So those are things that you're going to have to think about, and you might decide somewhere in the middle and manually set up an exposure that's going to work, and work within that. Play with it both ways, and the one way around it is like I've done with this one, and just exclude the sky because it makes it too complicated, and I've got a relatively simple band of exposure. And you'll see there that I haven't moved the camera very much in order to get that streaky blur. So that's probably just about that. So if I'd gone there, there'd be sky in it. So it's just a relatively small movement that's been achieved. So it's a vertical movement, so I'm just moving up and down. Well, you can do it either way. Doesn't make any difference. Well, it does. No problem. I suspect I've moved down here because you can see the sparkles on the grasses at the bottom that are more apparent. So, and just depends on the length. It's a combination of the. You could move up, and you could, yeah, I see what you're saying. Generally, I'd move it.
The grass wouldn't. You wouldn't get the individual.
No. No. So that I probably have there. That's just that. So you're going to try it both ways, and then at the same scene, and then have a look and see what you come up with. It's all about experimenting and playing with things. So the next one is exactly the same technique, but just a different thought pattern when it comes to the exposure. Obviously, there's just a little bit of light shining on that one central birch tree, and everything else is phased to darkness, and it made a really interesting abstract picture that I kind of like. But again, still essentially vertical movement. And another one, this was taken from the ferry, and there's a whole bunch of trees that have all been poisoned. So wilding pines that they've poisoned, so there's a whole bunch of dead trees that you go through in the forest, and they sort of jumped out at me, and they were being strongly lit, and so it created a kind of a dramatic looking picture with just a simple vertical movement. Right, next sort of movement is the opposite, obviously, it's horizontal. And this is when the faster you go, the more abstraction you're going to achieve. And this is a situation where effectively you're simplifying things into just chunks of shape and colour. And the greater the distance that you pan, the more abstract it's kind of getting. And this has got a little bit of hill form in the background, but it's still a reasonably lengthy move, so it's long and streaky. Interestingly, the red at the front comes from an upturned boat that was on the shore of the lake in front of me. So I actually got down right now. I'm kneeling beside the boat, and I did the horizontal movement in the boat, and hence we get this completely out of focus. I was focused somewhere out in the distance, not you can tell anywhere about what was focused there, but this is a reasonably lengthy sideways movement to achieve that, and so it's mainly abstract blocks of colour. I can do exactly the same thing in exactly the same place, and it's still red in the front, but this was a relatively slow, not so much of a movement, so probably the same exposure length, because I was sitting in the same place, so I'm unlikely to have changed stuff, but there's way less abstraction because there's less movement in the same shutter speed. So that's when I was talking about the combination of movement and shutter speed and how the two kind of play in against each other. So big movement over a long shutter speed, you're going to abstract things even more. Small movement, you're still going to get rid of details, but you're going to keep some sort of more context. And things sometimes move as well. This is effectively just a horizontal movement, but the antelope were running as well. So they've added another complexity into that whole thing. And I wasn't intending to exactly pan with it, but the effect has been that I've panned with the antelope. So their body form is stronger, and the reflections are bounced around all over the place, and effectively it's essentially a horizontal movement that we achieved there. So lots of different things can happen, and one exposure after the other can be quite different. Right, the other single axis thing you can do is rotate the camera. So here's a rotate the camera image, and this was in a museum in Singapore, and that's one of those little trishaw things, rickshaws that they used to cart around, and there's people wandering around the background, and they've all kind of been blurred out. And here you get a greater amount of blur away from the center of blur. So when you're rotating, you've got to be kind of aware of what you're trying to rotate around. I kind of like the fact on the back of the wheel, you've got those little streaks of light that look like snakes. So those are relatively small, and it was a pin light in the background that I wasn't even aware of. But at further away, much greater movement and much stronger thing has happened in that rotational thing. So that's rotational. Here's another example of rotating with some autumn leaves, and the leaves and the green and orange leaves that were really close to me have blurred completely because one, they're really close, and so they're moving greater, and two, they're further out from the center of rotation. So when it comes to rotating, it's where you put the center of rotation, and that's a bit of practice. It's easy to rotate it about the middle. Sometimes if you put it out to the side, so if you rotate it about the middle, you hold the camera there and you just twist it around the lens. But if you're out to one side, you're doing this sort of thing. And the center of rotation might be over there, off to one side, if that makes sense. Again, the only way to do it is to play and try. So with the other thing that's worth thinking about with rotational movement, you don't need very much to create a cool effect. So this is relatively small. It's still a rotational movement. It's rotated around the light spot in the distance, and further, because that distance is further away, it's relatively less affected, and because it's the center of rotation, it's relatively less effective. But you can see that that's what it is. But if you look at the blur on the hills up to either side, it creates this kind of spooky effect that I really enjoyed. I took some regular photographs in that same place. This is my favourite by a long shot. And you can go the whole hog with rotating things and get bizarre stuff like that I have absolutely no idea what it is, but when I saw it in my Lightroom catalogue, I went, oh, that's cool, it's a rotation one, I'll stick it in. But it's an abstract of land and sea and air, I think, but doesn't matter. It's just abstract. So those three types of movement are the simple single phase way of doing it. The next thing we move on to is mix and matching them. So going sideways and up, around and up, around and back, around and away. I'm going to start with a favourite of mine. Does anybody recognise this place? Can anybody guess who I was standing beside there? This is Barbara Burry's tree. So if anybody's seen Barbara's larch trees, she's had a whole series of images that she did really well with at various stages. And Barbara was standing right beside me there, and this was about 2 weeks before she went into hospital where she eventually passed away. So this is a pretty cool picture for me. What I was trying to do here, and I think you can see it, you can see the pathway through there. I was trying to make a movement that echoed the path. I was basically aiming at the path and doing this sort of thing to follow the path as it came down. It was a down but across. So it's a combination of sideways and up and down, but it was to follow the path, and yeah, that's the intent. The streaks of light are kind of following the path. So that's something you can do as a combination, which is just like a combination of up and down and left and right. Here's another one that's an interesting combination of things. There's a couple of things that are worth looking at here. You can essentially see the movement that I've made in the grasses in the foreground. And it is like a kind of a up like that. I think I've gone up and across. And in the tops of the trees, that's created that kind of semicircular thing in the trees, and it's emphasized the tree forms. But you can actually see, if you look at the raw file, which is much more, not as sort of punchy as this, you can see the shapes at the bottom that are different, that are timed in with that round thing at the top. So the movement you make interacts with the subject matter and the distance from the subject, and it creates different effects in different situations. So a flick was what was happening there, but it was kind of a sideways, sort of a combination of a rotation and a movement like that. In terms of, this is another good example of giving it a good thrashing in Photoshop as well. You'll see in the greenery of the trees, there's a bunch of texture and scratch kind of lines in there. What I did with that is I just got some grain, a layer of grain, made some grain, and then motion blurred the grain, and then painted that sort of streaky sideways in there, and there's some cross as well. I kind of gave it a cross hatch of streaks in post-processing because it was a bit flat without it. And then the sky was also much more, it was just a single colour, so I just painted in a texture layer on top of that as well. So the photograph, the movement can be there, but then you can build all that on top of itself. So that's a combination of, again, across and up. Back to pathways in the trees. There's quite a lot of these in my pictures. This one's a bit different. You'll look, notice how the thing's got a kind of a soft feel about it. Now, and then you can see the little highlights that there's a kind of a hook and an upwards movement. What's also happened there is that I have moved the camera into the frame, and that's what's created the soft bit. So I've gone with that little hook, I've gone in and up and away. So that's literally what I do. I look at it and I move it in, or you can come back as well. They both achieve the same thing. By having the camera focused on something and moving it this way towards the frame, that's where you get that slight softening of things. It doesn't abstract as much, but it creates that softening effect, which is particularly prevalent on the pathway. So, little twist and move up. I suspect the up was probably intentional, but the little twist probably wasn't. But when I was thinking about moving it forwards, I probably just twisted the camera as I moved it forward and up. So once you start playing with these things and adding them together, you'll end up going, oh, what if I do this as well as that, to where things come up. And, like I said, back to the purpose and intent, I wanted the pathway to be relatively clear and still existent, but I wanted it to be softened. And that's why I used the push into the frame thing with that one. Okay, another simple one. This is just about abstraction. This is a water faucet drink thing in the art gallery. There's a kind of a round thing about a foot round probably with a little drink, and I just went, held it over and just did that. Lifted it away and turned it. Why? I don't know, it just seemed to be fun. And that's all this is. This is just kind of a fun, interesting shape. And if you know what it is, you can probably scratch your head and go, I can sort of imagine it. But then it becomes a shape or in anything that you present that picture to somebody. I'm inviting them to explore whatever they want. Take that anywhere you want. Think of it as anything you like, because it's pretty unlikely that you'll realise that it's that drink fountain you saw in the art gallery. What you guys know, but nobody else in the world will. So sometimes more abstract is, I'm going abstract with things. And the final one is the zoom thing. So this is a kind of a zoom movement, and when I do that, I tend to hold the zoom ring and do this. Push the camera and the zoom kind of happens by itself. I don't try to go. You can do it both ways, but I find it easier to move the whole camera, just hold the zoom ring the same. And it's different zooming in to out from out to in. Same sort of thing will happen all the time. You'll get that kind of blurry effect and streaky thing. And again, it'll focus when you move the camera as well. I'm kind of aiming at a point. That's why I've got that kind of zoomed effect out of the bottom part of the frame. And it was at the bottom part of it. I've cropped it square, but I've just taken stuff off the side. And again, I played a bit more in Photoshop to make it, put a few of that square shape around it. Didn't exist until Photoshop put it in for me. So, combined movements. Essentially, all I want to say with combined movements is there's infinite possibilities that you can put together, and each possibility will do different things. But I want you to think about being intentional with the way you do that, and then also recognizing that even if you're being intentional, you're probably going to be surprised by something. So being open to the surprise and then going back a step and then exploring that surprise all the way to the end of it. And it's kind of I like to think about, it's not a series, but it's a series of ICM photographs that I made. I treat these exactly the same way as I treat a slider in Lightroom. I always keep going until it's too far and then go back to where the kind of right place is. With the ICM thing, with exploring a particular movement, I'll keep going until either I get sick of it or it starts to get repetitive or it's not doing what I want it to do, and that means I've covered the whole gambit, and away we go from there. So that's the basic movements, and then step forward. The next thing I want to talk about is shoot, then move. And what I mean here is this is where the kind of a 1 to 2 seconds is good. It's when you go click, 2, 3, move. And what I'm trying to do there is I'm trying to get a solid piece of something that's sharpish. It's never sharp, but it's sharpish. There's a foundation of the image underneath it, and then I'm going to layer movement on top of it. So for a sort of a 1.5 second exposure, I'll start thinking about, well, what do I want to start with? Maybe I'm going to start with a 0.5 second that's sharp and then movement on top of that. So I'll go click to move. Or the other way is you can go move, hold. But if you say it to yourself and that sort of thing, that's literally what I do. If I want to do it, it's hold, move, or 2, I'd usually count. And so that I'm actually going 1, 2, 3 sort of thing. Or it can be sideways or whatever you want to do. But there's lots of possibilities, and it creates that sort of basis for a picture that then goes weird. Here's an example. So I was intrigued by, we've all seen backlit sparkles of water, how they sparkle and I just wanted them to do something. I was looking at that tree on the other side of the bay, and that was my predominant picture, but I wanted the sparkles to sparkle. So literally, if it looks like the sparkle, it looks like I've gone down, doesn't it? I've gone 1, 2, down to get the sparkles to lift up and to zip around. There's also a bit of sideways jiggery going on at the same time. So, but I've got my basic sort of position and basic picture that I've layered on top with highlights. And highlights are the things that kind of come through in this sort of things the most strongly. Here's another example shot in my backyard. We've got some toys and some cabbage trees, and they were being nicely side lit, but it was windy as, and everything was blowing everywhere. In this case, I've done, well, you can see the movement. It's a kind of a half circle, isn't it, in the highlights? And I've gone click 2 like that, or it might be move 2, 3. I don't know which way around it was, but that's what I've got, that kind of circle. And what I was trying to achieve, and this was, I definitely remember standing there going, let's make it feel like it's windy, because it was windy, and make a movement and then a hold on the light on the cabbage tree. So the black behind it has all just disappeared to black. There's no movement to be seen there because it's not exposed for that, but it's exposed for the white, and I've got the movement in the white. I've got the basic structure of the cabbage tree, but I've also got some windy looking blown about things there. And like I say, this one particularly, I remember specifically what I was thinking. So that's a really good example of being purposeful when you do that sort of thing. Creates a picture that tells the story that you intend to tell. Here's another one, same sort of thing, lying in the long grasses in lots of sun. So I've got some pictures of the grass heads, and then just waved the camera in. I've got no idea, up and down, random, sideways, all over the place. But there's a combination of a solid picture there and then a wave. And again, I've got probably 20 of these sitting in my Lightroom thing, and there's 2 of them that I've played with and sharpened up that had the right kind of balance of them. I haven't got around to throwing them away, but that's what I need to do. So, and here's another one. There was a rope hanging over the waterfalls thing. This is up by Rotorua, so a real fast kind of banging stream. So it had lots of bubbly water and all that sort of stuff. And the rope was obviously for swinging out, but it's just hanging in the water. And I just wanted it to be kind of dynamic. So first of all, it's vertical. So I've tipped the camera sideways to create that slight angle to give the rope a bit of dynamic shape to it. I've gone click 2, 3, move, and I've got a quick move, and it hasn't been a uniform move because there's a gap, and then there's another sharpish couple of things. So my movement wasn't as fluid, so I've got to stop and then another stop. It's just because that's what happens, and it's created in the background. All the highlights are just all over the show. But that's what the water was doing all over the show, and I got a sense, I think, of movement within that sense that swing thing was moving. Another one. So again, you can see that I used this technique a bit because I found a lot that I liked, so I've stuck them in here. This was a bench. It was in the UK when I was staying with my brother. Over the back of his house, there's a big meadow that had a moor or something, they probably call them in the UK, but they had all these sort of benches under the trees that you looked around, and the sun was shining through and there was kind of dappled light. So I wanted to get the dappled light feeling, and I wanted to also see the park bench. So it's a click, 2, 3, move. And the movement you can see there is just pretty simple, diagonal, sweeping sort of a movement that's brought the light through and shining onto it. Okay, that's shoot then move. The next thing I want to talk about is shooting while you are moving. So there's a number of possibilities in here and a number of thoughts that happen. And the very first one is a real simple thing that happened, and this is one of the early photographs. I think I did all right with it at CPS, I can't remember, but it was one of my my early photographs, not long after I joined CPS. I was flying in the 777. I was in Beijing, and basically I was walking around. This was just after Beijing had held the Olympics, so they had lots of fences and people stuff around the place where we'd been. And I was walking behind this guy trying to figure out how to make a photograph of somebody, and I had the ISO all the way up, and then I went, nah, just take a photograph. So I just held my camera and walked behind the guy and pushed the button. So there's nothing tricky in this movement. I'm just walking along behind this dude in front of me, and I just pushed the button at the same time. But I've got interesting shapes. I looked at it and went, gosh, I should have got rid of those big blobs to the top right. And I might still, but I didn't in the original one, so you got to see what it is. So this is no attempt to move the camera at all. I just simply walked along, and it was dark, and pushed the button while I was walking. The light on the fences was the bit that I kind of like, and I like the fact that the movement that he's got with his foot off the ground, and he, for me, is being drawn into the bright light area. So that picture was fun. I've got a few of this style because it's really cool fun. This is a shoot while on the move. This was photographed out of a train, and this technique is really simple. Basically, what I'm trying to do is to focus on an object and then pan onto that object as the vehicle, train, or whatever it is moves past. So you're moving the camera, looking at the particular object, and when that happens, anything in front of the object that I'm panning on, tends to move kind of towards the back, and anything that's behind the object tends to move relatively towards the front. And that's because of the double movement, the fact that the train in this case is moving, I'm moving the camera, but I'm trying to hold the subject reasonably sharp, and the trees are relatively sharp. I'd focused on them, and then I'd tried to pan on them from a moving vehicle. It's awesome fun, and you get these big swirls, and they're kind of cool. So I like making these swirls. So I'm going to show a few swirls, and they're all the same technique. This one is also from the train a bit further, a bit more obvious what I focused on, and I managed to hold the focus on that. And you can see just down, it wasn't quite right, was it? Because I've panned to just slightly to the right of the power pole instead of so that little bush is sharper than the power pole is itself. But you can kind of see the swirl, which is fun. So those two are off a train. This is out the door of the window of the car that we were driving in Australia. We drove between when our house was being fixed after the earthquake. We went on holiday and drove from Melbourne to Adelaide, which was really cool. But we went for hours through this just nothing sort of grassland area, and every time a lamppost turned up, I tried to do that. Got lots of them, not many of them that successful. And one more of these things. Do you remember this, Nelson? This is out of Nelson's car. Where were we? We'd come over the hill from somewhere at Fiordland, wasn't it? Can you remember? Yes, it was. Yeah, and it was snowing. And I was trying to focus on little trees that were all getting snow on them. And you can, again, see the circles and spirals and stuff like that. So that's a technique that I really think is cool fun, and people will queue up to get in the passenger seat because you get to do that, and when you're driving you miss out on it. Drivers get annoyed at you because you won't shut the window. That's the crux of it. So again, this can be a bit faster, a bit of a hint. You can go away with like a 60th of a second, usually works pretty well there. 70 to 200 is probably the sort of primo lens to be doing with it. So you've got a little bit of length and compression, and you need to be thinking ahead. There's an object, quickly focus on it, zoom click, and it's as quick as that. So 60th is like a good starting point. Go and have a go, it's fun. And when you find some circles. Right, multiple exposures. So this is a way of in-camera creating a mix of the different sort of blurs that you created by different. So there's a bunch of things you can do here. You can change the focus. You can have one moving, one still. You can move one in one direction and one another direction. It depends on the blend mode you use, what you're going to achieve. If you have I don't know if you've done much multi, but if you have a look at multis, most cameras have a system where you can do a kind of a normal blend, which blends a sort of a mix of both images together. You can have a lighten blend, which will blend the highlights of the first picture through to the second one. So the dark bits won't blend. And you can do a darken one where the dark bits will and the light bits won't. All of those things create different effects. Here's an effect that it's just two blends of, I have absolutely no idea what it is, but there's two things blended together to create sort of abstract patterns that are all in different directions. So it's two exposures, different movements, and different colors have kind of blended together. Yeah, and that's fun. This is done a little bit more intentionally, but the same thing. This is the same day that I took the picture of the cabbage tree in the wind. So this is the same situation. And that's a pretty good example of what generally happens. I'll start with something relatively still, go to something a little bit of movement, and then end up going completely nuts as I progress through making things go in different directions. So this is a multiple exposure of two different times of blend. The one to the left with all the swirls is obviously a turn, so I'm getting highlights come through there. And then I've rotated the camera through 90 degrees and I've photographed the toys and moved it up. So the first movement would have been something like that. The second one is turning the camera this way, exposing it and doing that. So I've got the movements coming in different relationships in different ways. So combined together to create all sorts of things. I've even done a couple with setups. So that's a beer can sitting on a bit of black paper with a light shining on it. The two top ones, I've kind of moved the beer can. So it's three exposures. And the third one is the beer can just in its original position. So the streak is the movement of the beer can and the thicks came together. So that was kind of planned and kind of worked. So I was pretty happy with how that came together, but that's what it's done by. Another example of, this is sort of achieves a similar effect to the still, hold it still and move, but this is an exposure. One exposure is actually still. So the picture of the trees and the light in behind it is a normal kind of exposure. And then I've gone to a second exposure in screen mode and moved the camera significantly so that all I've got is little streaks of light that have come through, and all the streaks of light are actually the light bouncing off the leaves. So there weren't sort of streaks of light there, but it's created streaks. Yeah, that was done with a multiple exposure. So multiple exposure just adds another dimension to it, and you can keep going further. So post-processing. What I'm going to do is show you some images that have had some unusual post-processing done to them and demo what you can do with it with Photoshop, and then I'm going to step through two or three of them, and I'm actually going to go through some layers in a Photoshopped image. So the first one is just adding a sharp element to a blurry picture. This is the same time there was a lamppost on the previous one. This is in Australia going backwards and forwards through those grasses again. And I like the fact that the movement is kind of showing the direction that the car was moving, and there's relatively little movement in the clouds because they're miles away. But I wanted a bird. I went, well, just add something sharp. So I just took a bird and stuck him in. And I quite like it. It took a bit of jiggery pokering to get the tonality right, but just by adding a picture, it's a composite image, but the bird becomes a kind of it lifts the picture. I kind of liked it. This is a technique that is often, you'll see pictures of people walking on beaches where the beach has been all, done in an impressionistic sort of blurry, ICM-y style, and then there's a couple of people that are right in the place. And again, that's probably been done by, the people were probably there. The person probably took a sharp image on one frame with the pictures, with the people on it, and then they did their blurry thing to achieve whatever they wanted to create this, abstract vision of the beach, and then to cement it home and say it is a beach and there are people walking on it. They have cut the people out and then superimposed them on and blended the whole thing together. There's relatively, you quite often see a sharp surfer on a streaky, blurry wave, kind of same technique. So this technique of adding a sharp element to the blurry images is one composite image thing. Now, there's another image you're going to have seen before. This is what I also did with the picture that I saw before. Again, it's looking out that back window, and I have taken the image that I showed you before with the double exposure, and I've turned it through 90 degrees so that the up and down is actually the way it is. And then I've superimposed over bottom, a tree, essentially. It's another one of my favourite tree pictures I've got from somewhere else. This is a nature thing. What can I do to talk about nature on top of it? So I've just blended with dark mode the picture of the tree, and all that's come through is the dark trunk. And then I put that frame around the outside of it, and it's pushed the abstraction a little bit more. Again, we talked about the colours aren't anywhere near as punchy as they probably need to be, so we need to be working on the projector, but when I see them, that's what's happening. But that's what it's happened. It's constructed with an ICM image, and on top of that, I've put two other layers that have come together. One is just the tree that I've put in there, and the other is that frame thing that's happened. This one, again, one of my favourites. This was, again, shot out of the moving car on the way down. There's a little road that goes into, what's the lake over in Hokitika, Mahinapua, yeah. If you drive into Mahinapua, there's like a tunnel you drive through. And there was some light shining on this panga, and I was sitting in the passenger seat, fortunately, and did a quick kind of zoomy thing. So there was some movement in behind this. If you look up in the top right corner, you'll see some movements the other way. But I wanted to add something that kind of, for me, represented the sun that was shining through the trees onto the panga. And so all the top left corner, pretty much the whole side really, I've added some more, basically frame in there, and I've just superimposed another bit of zoomed, blurry stuff that from another shot exactly the same 5 seconds later that wasn't as much successful, but it did have that streaky bit of green, and you can superimpose that on top of it. It's just, what I want to show you, this is just, the files are so flexible. You can do all sorts of things, and just because it didn't happen that way in front of you, you can imagine that it happened, and you can make what you imagined happen on your computer. That's one of the things I love the most about it. It's just awesome fun, making cool things. That's a picture I'm quite happy of. The next one was taken at the winter school in Omarama, and we went around to the side of, I can't remember what was there. It was the edge of the lake, and there was a sort of a bunch of rushes and plants and really interesting things. And I made this photograph of basically a streaky, blurry looking tree that had the water behind it. But it didn't look like that when I first started. So I'm going to show you how this came from where it was to what I've produced there. So that's the picture. This is so you can see there are 1, 2, 3, 4 layers in the Photoshop stack of this. This is the bottom one. And this is I've obviously moved the camera and got a kind of a streaky looking thing there, and I've got the basis of that plant. Clearly, I took lots of it. I played with it to try and get what I wanted, and I wanted something a bit more complex, so I just added another layer that had the same thing in it, but from a slightly different angle, and had a few more branches in it. And by just merging the two layers together, I've added some complexity on the right-hand side of this frame. I've still got that central kind of stem, if you want to call it that, is still brighter. And now I looked at the left-hand side, and when there's not enough on the left-hand side. So I took a completely another frame that had nothing to do with that thing, but it had a nice bit that I wanted to stick in there. So the next one has got that added on it. But as I also said, I often take a sharp one because I like to incorporate a sharp bit back on it. So I've got a sharp bit of that central stem, and then I turn that top layer on, and that's how it comes. So anything's possible. It really just what I wanted to demonstrate here was the fact that, you know, you have to achieve what you want while you're out there. You just start developing your vision, and then, you know, in front of the computer, some pretty cool things happen as well. And they're just as much fun for me anyway, as playing around in the real situation. Right, the last one I'm going to talk about is what I call the full Monty. And the full Monty is, I'm going to go AKA Andy Gray. How many people have heard of Andy Gray? But if you've seen Andy Gray, I'm going to slightly demonstrate what Andy Gray does with his camera. He holds his, well, I can't do it his way because I'm going to drop it, but he holds the camera that and he does this sort of thing. And he does it this way, actually. I don't know how the hell he does it, but he does it backhand, but I find it this hand is way. And if you want to watch him do it, go and Google him, look up on YouTube and find some of his older ones. He's got some talk through things of how he does it. What he's talking about trying to achieve, he hates foregrounds. He hates bland, ordinary foregrounds. What he wants to do is to bring the streaks into the foreground. He photographs old castles in the UK predominantly, and I've started using his techniques in all sorts of places, and I really like them because what they do is they create an abstraction, and I'm getting bits and pieces from various pictures and I'm merging them together, and I'll show you a demo of one in a minute. But I'm just going to click through some full Monty Andy Gray style pictures that I have made, and we can have a look at them. So that's an Otaki beach, and you can see that the beach, there's colours and lines and stuff that's come from the beach and from the sea into the foreground, and then there's also texture from the foreground. There's some other textures been added to it afterwards that have gone into the sky. So the things kind of flip upside down when you wave your camera upside down. I think I might have put those trees back in. They were there, and I had a less moved one which I've merged in like I just showed you before. To be honest, I can't remember exactly how I did it, but there would have been lots of layers. And if you look at Andy's style, he'll quite often get 5 or 6 layers stacked on top of each other and merge them together and create the different ideas. So that's at Otaki Beach. This is in Akaroa Harbour. The merge here is the streaky lines from the highlights that have just made something interesting. And I like the mountain form in the background, which has changed completely. Doesn't really look like that at all, but it's clearly a mountain and a harbour. This is up in the Reese Valley over behind Glenorchy, and it was raining and it was cold, but the streaks have come from the clouds that have created that streak, and they were done by a big flick of the camera and a merging of about 3 layers to achieve that, although I've left the mountain form reasonably normal. So this is way too normal for Andy, to be fair, but it's in the style of Andy, and I'm still calling it a full Monty picture. This next one is probably a bit more Andy. This is Cape Palliser, and if anybody's ever been there, it kind of feels like you could, if a southerly turned up, it's not the place you want to be. So I was actively trying to achieve that kind of picture, and I'm bringing the foreground in front of us is the cloud above the top, and that sort of swirled all around, and it created this, juxtaposition between cloud and looked like fog and mist and movement and all that sort of stuff. I've got multiple layers merged on top of at the top right hand of the frame. They're the same thing that I've merged in the different parts of it. So it's created that kind of bizarre thing. And then I'd taken a sharp picture and I merged the lighthouse back on top of it and blended the whole thing together. And I've even put a bit of orange in the top of the lighthouse as if it was shining, but it wasn't. yeah, so that's kind of fun. That's kind of the storm, even though it was a relatively nice day. But I think there are storms there, so I think it's a fair call. This one you've probably seen before. I did this earlier in the year, so I'm just going to do it again. And this is another example of how I came about making this picture, which was one that I had some success with last year. It was made pretty much after twilight. It was almost dark when we got there, so but there was a little bit of light behind it. And here's the Photoshop process. So there's the original picture. There's just a little bit of sky, a light to the west. This is in Riverton on the east coast, and that's somewhat. I think they've moved that church there. It didn't seem to fit, but either that or they've done it up. I enjoyed the tree in the background on the right-hand side, but everything on the left was no good at all. Didn't really want it, but it's a starting place. So the first layer was used to bring some blur and texture and stuff into the foreground. So that layer basically interacts with the foreground, and now I've got all this big horrible blob on the left that I want to get rid of. So I then took another complete frame, which is, and this all came from originally from the right hand side of that picture. So this, if you look carefully, you'll see that the sky is kind of mirrored. I've flipped one over and put it into the other side. So that went across there. The next was a little bit of darkening to kind of create that effect, and I like the fact that it had a sort of a line of brightness, just that looks like it goes along a hillside that's non-existent, and it created a more combined thing. And then on top of that, I have just added a texture layer, and that texture layer on top of things is a really good way to make everything sort of fit in together. So that's kind of the full Monty. That's kind of Andy Gray's bit of everything, or my interpretation of Andy Gray. And that's ICM as I see it. The key, I think, two keys. One is to be purposeful. If you're trying to achieve something, you're making the movement match with what you're seeing is the key. But another key to the whole thing, and I'm going to finish off on another quote which I think is perfect, is that creativity is intelligence having fun, according to Albert Einstein. So ICM is predominantly about having fun. So enjoy it. And there's no wrong answers. Cool. Thank you. Happy to answer any questions if everybody wants to while I have some of John's grapes, or we'll just go home. Okay, see ya. What did they ask? Somebody's asked about variable ND filters versus regular ones. Variable ones work. I don't know if anybody's tried them, but I don't use them much. I've had a cheap one, and that's the problem, I think. There's cheap ones and there's good ones. You don't need it, is the crux of it, for an ICM thinking. A 3 or a 6 is enough. And then you've got all the flexibility of, f1.8 through to f22. In order to, you can just use aperture priority with an ND filter on it and shut down enough to get yourself a 1.5 seconds or something like that. Variable ND filter. There's no wrong answer. I think I have found variable NDs problematic when you're looking at skies and you get that kind of band of movement, but I think in an ICM it would be fine. So yeah. Do you then use that to control your shutter speed? Or?
Sometimes.
Yeah.
Depends on how bright the day is.
Yeah.
There's really bright days when I find the ND filter really helps.
Yeah. So what I'd say to the question is, if you've got one, use it, and if you can borrow one, try it. But I don't. Okay.
What's that numbers?